Prayer. Holy Creator, we thank you for letting us be together with this lesson as we travel this journey together towards racial equity and to be doing your holy word. Show us what we may be shown for your mercy and grace on this world. We ask these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. So, what did you guys think of the reading this week? What stuck out to you?
I thought about Natasha. I thought about how lonely it must have been for her, must still be for her. I thought when she came, it wouldn't be easy for her or for her husband. But this chapter really reinforced how prevalent our white privilege lens is in all the tiny things that I, as a white woman, take for granted. And as a woman, there's a lot of progress to be made. But again, it reminded me of how strong our paradigm is, our paradigm of normalcy. It's so much a part of us, it's so unseen. And the many, many tiny ways that it affects a person who is different.
Good.
I was struck by a memory of a Natasha and Lorenzo's class, Sunday school class that happened last fall. And I was in it, and I was just blown away by their, not only by the content, but by the skill with which they taught. And I'm having a moment of shame when I realize that the way I complimented them very definitely suggested that I was surprised. And I was. Let's face it, I was. I don't expect Black people to be as smart as white people. I don't. That's stunning.
It is.
After 73 years of life.
And I think you look at that as the 73 years that you build up to thinking that way. That's why we're taking down so many of these biases that we're not even aware of.
Share one thing, Nancy, before we move on. Jen and Pam and I were in a meeting with Natasha last week when we wanted to sort of unpack some of the course we took through the General Assembly. And she shared with us that the reason she'd gotten to know tonight was that there has been a time when she and Lorenzo feared for their lives here.
Here?
Yes. And that's why they went and talked to Chief Knight. And he has befriended them, and they've meet the children in Children's Corner, and but she's formed a relationship with him and she didn't talk about what happened, but we were stunned.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. How many of you, just in general, have taken time to look at your family's history?
I have.
Okay. Anybody else?
I have, on both my mother and father's side.
Okay. Well, one of the things that Tasha Morrison brought out this week was that when we have our historic understanding, we actually lose part of our identity. And without knowing our history, it can be difficult to know where we came from, and we don't know what needs to be repairing, we don't know what needs to be reconciled. And as we learn more and more of the injustices committed by some of our white ancestors, we realize then that, and the term that we're using for this class and for many other classes, workshops that Judy and I have been in, is BIPOC, Black, Indigent, People of Color.
I think it's indigenous.
Indigenous, you mean?
Indigenous,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, grief. And they deserve justice. And we need to understand the role of the white church. And you read some of that in the reading this week about the Southern Baptist Church that split. And you remember why they split?
Because of the elders, right?
Slavery.
It was slavery.
But
You know, it was in the 1840s. Yes, you.
sorry about that.
Service missionaries, that was it.
Yeah.
Right,
That's right.
They didn't want missionaries to be slave owners, some of them. But
right. And that's what split. And the white church then became very complicit in racism. So let's go to page 9 for a minute, and let's look at the questions. Have you studied non-white cultures in America and how those cultures came to be here? If so, what books and articles have you read, and what videos and documentaries have you watched about the history of those cultures prior to the forced migration?
Only one. And,
Yeah.
and it was because I was tutoring at Schreiner. And my student had been assigned to read excerpts from Chinua Achebe's story of the arrival of white missionaries in an African village. And it was very shocking, I guess, to read from the standpoint of the native people how the missionaries behaved.
Okay.
And so that's the only one I can think of.
Makes
me want to go looking for some good ones.
Donna, go ahead.
when I visited my daughter summer before last in Georgetown, South Carolina, we made a point to go down to the front, which is like the boardwalk, and I read a lot of the history of how the white planters came to South Carolina. And of course, there was also the slave auction site there. And I was surprised at how open these postings were about what happened that was not really, I mean, it was history, but not necessarily something to be proud of. It was very factual. And it was eye-opening. And into South Carolina, many of them, the white young men who were not firstborn sons, were given property to start these rice plantations. And they came from England. That's who supported this financially. I learned a lot.
Wow. And what you tell us what else you did with our book this week?
Do what? I say it again.
What you were talking to Judy about with what you did with our book?
So when I first started reading this, I'll admit my some of my flares went up, and I thought, no, I need to think about this. So I wrote myself an essay, and I wrote it in the front of the book on a blank page about how I'm feeling now, what I think I believe, how I'm responding to what's going on around me. And so when I finish this study, I'll see if my mind has changed. I'll see if I've grown or if things appear differently. But I felt like I needed to record where I was right now.
I think that's a good idea. And in many of the things that we've done, they suggest journaling throughout, because you're facing some things, like you said, Donna, that can make you just flare up and say, no, that person, my people would never have done that. But
and my response was, well, my people might have done that, but does that mean I have to carry that on my shoulders? Am I responsible? Or am I responsible for trying just to reconcile? I mean, you know, there's a lot of, in my mind, there's a lot of energy, subtle energy going into putting blame on, you know, on something that a lot you didn't even realize existed. So
before we can reconcile, a lot of steps have to be taken. And a lot of those steps include things like confession.
And lamentation.
Pardon?
And lamentation.
And lamentation. And go ahead, Mary Ellen.
I was thinking that a lot of the people I differ with on Facebook, and some of them are kin to me, it occurred to me that one of the reasons they are reluctant to face the evils of white supremacy that we're all complicit in is that it means in their minds undermining the love they feel for their family members, for their ancestors. They have to kind of reject them and judge them and push them aside. And I'm sort of struggling with that. I know that my grandfather was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and I know he was a county commissioner. So I started trying to find on the web if there had ever been any lynchings in Will Barger County when he was the county commissioner. And I can't find it. I can't find that there were any. But this is sort of tangentially related, Donna. Yesterday, I was out in the car and I was listening to a radio program. And this woman discovered that her grandfather was a member of the SS and that he went to Poland and took over Polish farmers' lands and became the overseer. And that he was hated by those Polish farmers. And she found a translator and went to find the descendants of those Polish farmers and apologize. And when she came to one, he actually touched her and said, "You are not to blame. This was not your fault. You need to be liberated from this blame." I think it's hard, but we've got to keep somehow blame off our plates. That's not productive. That's not really what this is about. What this is about is uncovering the truth, lamenting it when it's grievous, and then doing something, changing something.
Right. Well, and the same thing with guilt. Blame and guilt kind of go together. It's not productive. So what other books have you read? And I'm going to give you two that I read back in the 60s that opened my eyes. One of them was Lynching at the Cross by James Cone, that is on Black liberation theology. And the other is James Baldwin. And James Baldwin was an amazing writer. If you've never read any of his work, there's a lot out there to read.
Spell the last name. Spell the last name.
Okay, James Cone is C-O-N-E. And James Baldwin is B-A-L-D-W-I-N. And they were writing during the civil rights era of marches and things like that. But what they said then is applicable today. What are some books you've read or from movies you've seen? Did anybody read or see the movie Just Mercy?
Fabulous. Oh, it's a fabulous book. I didn't see the movie. I recently, oh gosh, The Hate You Give is a novel that I just read that I thought was very illuminating.
It is a good one.
And then I read an American Marriage, followed that, and it's an Oprah pick. It was good.
Yeah.
Those kind of things are very good vehicles for me. I learn from novels. I love to read, and I love stories.
Those are both good.
I just read
all the way back to Roots. Do you all remember that series?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I know there's been a lot written about it, the author since then and all that, but Alex Haley, but I thought it was a fascinating.
Yeah.
I finally read the Autobiography of Malcolm X and was much more impressed than I expected to be.
Yeah, that was
because he was, in my youth, he was the devil. And it ain't so.
No.
It's radical.
A little bit closer to home is a book called Same Kind of Black as Me.
Yeah.
And it takes place in my hometown of Fort Worth. And it basically describes the journey of a homeless, very angry Black man and a white couple. And that's as far as I'll go, but it is truly an eye-opener of the possibilities that exist today for us in our neighborhoods, as a matter of fact.
Bill Blackburn got to know them, and I think brought them to Kerrville for something many years ago. I didn't go, but I remember hearing about it.
I think it was the Salvation Army fundraising.
Yeah, probably when Frank was there, right?
I just read a book called I'm Still Here. Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown, who is a woman. And I couldn't put it down. It was a lot. She writes a lot like this author. But I also rented again The Color Purple because it had been so long since I'd seen it. And it was great to revisit it through the eyes of today. There were things I noticed this time that I don't remember seeing before.
John.
You know, The Blind Side, those of you who may have seen that, can you turn this off?
It's off.
I'm sorry.
What was he trying to say?
I was going to say The Blind Side with Sandra Bullock, set in Mississippi.
She takes in the boy.
Takes in a semi-homeless boy and raise him. And then the NAACP came in to really find out what that was all about, because they couldn't believe a white family at that time in Mississippi to actually do that. And so there are changes out there that can be done.
It's interesting listening to people refer to books that have been made into films and so on. It seems to me that films have had a greater impact sometimes in bringing the ideas to a broader audience, sadly. But I was saying, when you mentioned Roots, I think that was a very formative change when that happened, and people referred to that as the standard. But I was thinking, all of us of our age, we can remember when history was reported much more dispassionately than the way it's written now, and it's been a huge change. And so some of the things that you all have mentioned, like Malcolm X and James Baldwin, were so revolutionary at the time, and how normalized it's become. And that says to me that maybe something decent is happening, not great, but so the evolution is, unfortunately, is long overdue. and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think that's one of our biggest problems at this point, is our capacity to handle long-term situations. We want instant gratification and change now. So,
Any other books anybody has?
Well, I was going to mention not a book, but a movie we recently saw called Forgiven. I don't know if any of you have seen that, but it was in South Africa, and it had Bishop Tutu and a man. Have you seen it, Judy?
No, but that's about the Reconciliation Commission, right, that he formed.
Yeah. And this man who had murdered and tortured people, and I was just so taken with the portrayal of Bishop Tutu. He was such a gentle and very intelligent man. So it's a lot of the conversation between this particular prisoner and himself. And it was very moving. Forgiven.
Okay. I would suggest.
I had to go get this one. Oh, excuse me, Nancy. I had to go get this one because it was an eye-opener to me. I'm not a great student of history, so I always just had what was basically given to me in high school and college. But it's The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I don't know if anybody's ever read it, but what I love about it is I've learned that most of the history we studied and learned was from a white, privileged perspective. And this is the people, the marginalized people telling their stories. And it was an eye-opener to me.
Say the author again.
It's Howard Zinn, Z-I-N-N.
Z-I-N-N?
Z like zebra.
Okay, Howard.
And
it's actually with the conquest of South America and what went on there with the early explorers, and just goes forward through all the different movements that we experienced. It's a good book.
Thank you, Julie. Anybody have others?
we haven't talked about Native Americans at all, and I'm terrible about remembering titles, but the situation is different in different parts of the country, of course. But one of the things that I read a book not very long ago, I can't remember, but it was about the oil and the money in Oklahoma. And there, in the 1920s, there were a lot of very wealthy people from the oil leases. And all throughout the history of the Native American, the one thing that has come to my mind is the complicity of law enforcement with the unjust practices. And that, of course, is at the forefront of things right now. If I can think of it later, I'll send out an email. But anyway,
Osage County.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
A true story, a true history.
Yes, but it's so fascinating because we think of the Native Americans as underdogs and unprivileged, and these are people that came into a lot of money and then were literally swindled out of it. But and it was an opportunity to make cultural changes and move on. But I mean, when you look at the whole history of the lands in the West and the Dakotas and that area, it's interesting. We forget about the British involvement and all of that in the West as well too. So
I know that was Killer of the Flower Moon.
Yes.
And it was also the story of the beginning of the FBI.
That's right. Yes.
That was
Jennifer, you had a book. Did you have a book?
We've just been reading on Native Americans. We've been reading, it's called Before Columbus, the young adult version of 1491. I've been reading it with my kids and studying the Aztecs and the conquistadors and all of that came with it, and the beginning of when they brought African slaves to Latin America to have there. And it's been, there's so much I wasn't taught in high school, and that was not, I mean, it was more long ago than I would prefer, but they were teaching this stuff even then. And I'm very happy to hear that the Howard Zinn book is being taught at Tybee, which really surprised me.
Wow.
I would
Good for us.
I would not have thought that, but one of my kids' friends' parents was telling me about it the other day, and I was, and then I'm reading, it's a historical fiction book called Homegoing, written by a woman from Ghana, and it starts with two half-sisters, and then one marries a British during colonial Africa, and she marries a British person who's there to help get the slaves on the ship and take them back. And one of the sisters becomes a slave. And every chapter after that is a new generation of those two women. So the next chapter is their first child. The next chapter is that child's child. And it follows kind of the different lives that they led and the connection they had to slavery kind of generationally. And it's really interesting because it is not masking the horrors of slavery and how that happened. And it's been really interesting to read that while learning about it from a nonfiction perspective and to have that aspect of it. And this book, it's backwards because of the screen, but We're Not Yet Equal. And it is a book that is all about the legislation that has happened since post-Civil War, all the way up to Obama becoming president. And it's about the legislation and how they fought it. Anytime that we have made any good strides, how people have come and fought it and found the way around it. And what I like about it is that it's very readable, even for someone who goes into it thinking that this is all not true. It's very factual. You can fact check her all you want. And even some of my family who thought that they were going to disagree with everything in this book were not able to. And it was presented in a way that they read the whole thing. And it just really, I feel like that's a really impressive author to be able to do that.
Anybody else?
What a great book list I'm getting.
Mary Ellen and I were talking earlier this week, and we were wondering if maybe we couldn't start with some of the books we've read that we're done with, if we couldn't start perhaps a library at church, and I've got the librarian on here, and that would be on anti-racism, that would borrow at different times and return so others could read it. And if you read it, if any of my books, I'll be glad to donate all of the books I've read. You could put your initials in the front cover on the right-hand side at the top. So we'll see how many people have read it. And when they're exhausted, we can either take it home or donate it to the church library. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
One more, Nancy. The book, and I can't remember the name, so I'm really good librarian with titles and authors, but maybe some of you have read it. It's about bringing smallpox to the Native Americans and how some of the traders and trading posts would purposely put smallpox scabs or whatever in the blankets that were sold to Native Americans. Because one of the reasons that our conquest of this continent was simpler was because so many Native Americans died at the time we were making this conquest. So.
What do you think, Pam? Is that a doable thing with having our own?
Again, how you planned for that to start? Where do you want it? What did you have in mind again?
Well, we originally thought maybe we could just leave them at the office, but then I thought they're going to get all junked up with books. So could we leave them at a certain place in the library?
Sure.
With just
that little round table when you first walk in.
Yeah.
On the right.
On
Okay.
the right. And then just help yourself to some of these book titles people have been talking about. Thank you. Okay, let's look on page 10 at question number 3. Do you approach conversations of racial reconciliation as if you have all the answers? You know, that's one thing that I've learned the most in all of the workshops I've taken. It is speak less and listen more. People of color have stories. We need to ask them about their stories. But do you approach, when you're talking about racial reconciliation, or if you're the willingness to be corrected, how do you react to that?
Well, I don't talk that much about it. Quite frankly, I don't talk that much about reconciliation.
Okay.
That's why I'm here.
I agree with you, Donna. I have no answers, so I'm open to suggestion.
I think it's hard. I had lunch with someone this week who something she said made me realize that if I had said anything about Black Lives Matter, she would have been very defensive. And unfortunately, I guess, because I didn't want to go there, I wanted us to have a pleasant conversation. And but I'm thinking that's going to happen more frequently. And, you know, how do I prepare for that? Because there is a big resistance. Big resistance.
There is.
I think that's my calling. I think I've decided that that's what I'm supposed to do, is cultivate ways to talk to other old white women that leads somewhere, that is full of humility, that listens. And then there's so far I've been reading this thing called the Toolkit for the Anti-White Ally. And that guy says the point of every conversation is to open the door to the next conversation. Don't expect to change anybody's attitude overnight. And, you know, all of us know that what we think today is the product of decades of change, probably.
Mary Ellen?
An answer that I really appreciate, Nancy, when somebody has said something to you about it, you say that at least you don't wake up worrying whether you're going to be injured or harmed today.
Yeah, I don't wake up worrying about being harmed because of the color of my skin.
Mary Ellen?
Go ahead, Bob.
Mary Ellen, help me out. What is the name of the lady that basically is in charge of the Black Community Center?
Lois Shaw.
All right. If somebody really wants to have a conversation and do a lot of listening in our town with someone who is very much involved and very humble, just walk in the door. Well, I guess you can't walk in the door anymore because of COVID, but she is a wonderful, wonderful Black lady that is probably in her 70s, maybe even older, that has been in Kerrville all this time and living the situation for the Black community in Kerrville. And she is a wonderful person. And Mary Ellen could expand on that. But that is just a very easy opportunity. And she and Natasha are friends. Natasha could also expedite that if you're interested.
Lorenzo is working with her even more, I believe. He's spending a lot of time at the Doyle Center.
When we talk to people of color or people who are white, and our job is to get to the white people, basically, like Mary Ellen said. The people of color know what the problem is. white people don't all agree. But when we do that, do we have a willingness to be corrected? Do we know how to be humble?
Hard.
When we're learning? Yes, it's hard. And Lois Shaw Bob is 80 years old this summer. And she is a delight. But too many times we choose somebody like Natasha or somebody like Lois and put pressure on them to speak for the entire people of color around the world. And we don't realize we're doing that. We're just trying to ask questions. So those are things we have to safeguard. But what does it look like to be humble and to be ready to be corrected? What does that look like to you?
Just listening. Not try to refute or say, but yes, but what about? You know.
Well, then
I think one of the hardest things is to go in it thinking, I am going to be made uncomfortable. This person is not going to be able to give me comfort, or at least it would be scummy of me to ask them to give me comfort. It's for me to live with a little discomfort first.
Yes.
And of course, nobody likes discomfort. Nobody wants to be made. Nobody wants to have that thing Donna talked about so well of feeling blamed, and having to sort through all that and get back on solid ground from that. But
you're making me think of John Ruth's. Y'all probably read his review of the book. He was with us also last week, and good white racist ? Kelly Connolly. And John, he kept saying, I'm a fast reader. I just thought, oh, this little book, I'm just going to read right through it on Sunday afternoon. And he said he read about 14 pages, and he said, I can't read this. This just, he felt, and it took him 3 weeks, to get through it, because it was so hard to realize, what he was reading, the truth in it. And
he did a magnificent job. I read his review 3 or 4 times, and it just makes the skin on the back of my neck or the hair just stand up. And he's made me so afraid to read that thing that I don't know that I could get through it. He just squirmed with the review.
I actually watched a webinar that the Presbyterian Outlook put on by that author, and I have the recording. So I'm going to try to figure out how to pull some pieces out of it if I can.
I did too.
Go back and re-watch that, since I missed the original one. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
Are we committed as a group, as a Sunday school group, as a covenant group? Are we committed to lean into this book, to reading each chapter and answering all those questions, even the difficult ones? What do you think, group?
Yeah.
Are we for it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here.
Came back.
And I love this group already. It's got some humility. It's got a high level of humility.
I have to share a funny story that Mary Ellen will be able to relate to, because she was in the same group, and Judy too, I think. No, Mary Ellen, this was Lorenzo's and Natasha. Somebody was, we had talked the week before about how silence makes us complicit. If you're in a conversation where there's racial talk and it's negative, if you say nothing, that makes you complicit to basically agreeing with what they're saying. And this one gentleman came back after that week's class and said, oh, I got used this week. And he said somebody was talking about the fact that you remember Ron Emanuel in Illinois, that he was the Chicago mayor, and perhaps he was going to run for a Senate seat. And the person said to our gentleman, well, he couldn't be recorded. He couldn't be elected. he's Jewish. And our gentleman in our class looked at him and he said, well, I think what you just said is racist. and it really shocked his companion. And he says, no, I don't think so. And our gentleman said, think about it. So as you know, as little as that was, he was practicing to do what he felt was the best to do in that situation, as opposed to staying silent. So I just want to share that because it still makes me giggle. When we go into reading books other than, you know, this book and other books, we don't learn a whole lot about the history of Black culture and Black art. And I brought out, Judy, if you don't mind, could you share the screen and put up To Sing America by Langston Hughes?
Let's see if I've got the right one. No, this one's I had the Harlem Renaissance. That's the one you get.
Nope.
No.
Okay, you have the other one, the we put on the mask, wear the mask.
Yeah.
You can put that one on.
Okay. Okay, let me get it just higher up here. Just a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. This is a poem by a man named Paul Dunbar. Paul Dunbar was born in 1872 and died in 1906. And he wrote this poem. This poem is the same poem, Susan, that was referenced in I'm Still Here.
Yes, because she talks about the masks that one of the phrases that stood out for me about that whole book was the phrase, the masks that Black people wear to deal with our comments that we don't even know are offensive. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to read this to you, and I want you to think, and I want you to look at what does this mean? What's behind the mask? We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to, excuse me, human guile. With torn, bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet, and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. And he ends that with that exclamation point, which makes it more emphatic. What do you see in that?
It's one way of
man.
Go ahead, Donna.
Was he a Black man?
Yes.
Was he not? Is he the famous opera singer?
I don't think he did opera. He was a poet, a writer. Bob?
I see the way they have of adapting to the world they live in. And we're the ones that set the rules for the world.
Mm-hmm. We're going to read more about this as we go on, but as white people throughout the ages, we have expected people who are different than us to assimilate to white culture. And this is one way of hiding And even Tasha, who wrote this book, talks about how comfortable she's been in when she first went to Austin into the white culture. And then she talked to her dad and realized she hadn't talked to another person of color for a while. So we'll read more about this, but this is one of those poems you ought to come back to often because you can feel the pain. You can hear the cries of their souls. Anybody have anything they want to say about that? Anything else they see in there?
In a way, it reminds, oh, go ahead, Tracy.
No, it's fine.
Go ahead,
In a way-
Tracy.
Okay. The metaphor of a mask gives you the anonymity to speak out. And that's what I kind of get from this. He wouldn't be making these statements at all if he didn't feel that he was not there, nobody paying any attention, which is pretty much, I think, the case of minorities. You look over them above or below.
I was going to say, I think he speaks for more than just the Black minority, for lots of marginalized and oppressed people.
I was thinking it sounds like survival.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is what I have to do to survive.
This is how I survive. Judy, see if you can see the I too.
Just a second. I'm not very good at this. So,
That's okay. We're patient.
which one? The
sing
meaning of, or the? I'm sorry. Whichever one do you want?
It should say, I too sing America.
Okay, let me see.
I was just too, because of the smile, that's how this person feels they are expected to behave, and if they don't, there will be consequences.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think I have that, Nancy. I'm sorry.
Well, let me read it to you, and then I'll put it in for next week.
Okay.
This is done by Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was born in 1902 and died in 1967, so a different era of poet than Paul Dunbar. But it flows. After you read We Wear the Mask, this one kind of flows together. It's called I Too America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well, and I grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at that table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then, besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
I remember that one.
What do you think? What do you see there? The hope?
Hope and a good, strong sense of self, which, in spite of everything, some human beings manage. Some families manage. Some parents manage to imbue in their children. I think sometimes what brings me the most immediate pain is the thought of how parents have to raise children in oppressed groups, because it's like you have to bind their feet, you have to keep them from sticking out. It's just, that just breaks my heart, that sort of thinking.
Bonnie, what do you think? Can you see all of that hurt in these two poems?
Yes, I can. Definitely can. And they've done a good job of expressing it, and to people of other, well, mainly I guess to the white people, they were trying to. With their
To the hiding from.
Yes.
you know, we use the phrase walk on the eggshell. Think about what life must be like for a person of color or someone who's indigenous.
I'm thinking back to the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, that I've almost finished. And one of the things that Ibram Kendi, and this is the guy, Bob, you mentioned from that article in the Atlantic last week, talks about, of course, how he's gone through his own realization of, you know, he's Black, but he says, you know, he realized he was a racist too, and helps unpack all that. But he talks about the churches and how church for Black people became such a refuge and a place, you know, where nobody bothered them, and they could, you know, be themselves and just have all of the kinds of relationships and just what a safe place that has been.
Yes.
For centuries. And that sometimes the thought of integrating a church is not such a happy thought.
Right.
I mean, people, I can remember talking about, as a matter of fact, we watched the funeral of Louis Abendon yesterday, and someone mentioned that there was a Black couple, and I remember them well, that had come to the church from someplace in the north, professional people, and how he was insistent that they be allowed to join the church, and was their friend. I mean, really befriended them and cross him. So they were integrated in. But just how difficult that must be to be I love BK and Fred for hanging with us, you know, because I mean, they're people that can do it, but not everybody could.
Before we close, our time is coming to a close, but I wanted to ask if anybody's ever heard of the Harlem Renaissance.
You want me to share that one?
Yes, please. It's gonna say what I'm gonna read.
Okay.
The Harlem Renaissance happened in the 1920s. It's an intellectual, social, and artistic explosion, and it's centered there in Harlem, Manhattan, New York City. The last poem I read, the I Too Am America by Langston Hughes, was published during that Renaissance. At the time, it was known as the New Negro Movement, named after the New Negro, a 1925 anthology edited by Elaine Locke. The movement also included the new African American cultural expression across urban areas, including the places in the Northeast, the Midwest. Washington, D.C. had a large Renaissance. I never knew anything about this. I'd never studied this in any book. I studied about all kinds of Renaissances around the world in world history. This is something that happened in our own backyard. And they
Would
brought...
this have been the time that the place in Tulsa was coming together, that neighborhood that we've all seen that was...
Greenwood.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that was about the same era, wasn't it?
It was. Pardon?
And then some of the arts from Harlem moved to Paris and to Europe for the ultimate flourishing of the arts and music and writing and so on.
Particularly jazz.
And that is where they got the idea to do it in Harlem, was from Paris. People were coming back and saying, we can do this. We've got this same talent.
Really? I thought it was... Okay, good. I'd like to know that.
I had units on this in American literature.
Yeah.
Long ago.
Yeah, I thought that a lot of the the movement to Germany as well in Paris was a result of the biases of Harlem being so contained. There was kind of a border where nobody could move south of, I can't remember the street, but so that's interesting.
There's so many artists that we don't know about that probably today will be given more credit and more visual Let's turn to page 11, and we'll end with this a prayer for humility. Next, you're going to get into chapter 2, and you're going to read about microaggressions, and that's an interesting thing to learn about. But would somebody like to read a prayer for humility? I will. Lord, we ask that the words of this book fall on the soil of our hearts. Come into our brokenness, our lives with your love that heals all. Consume our pride and replace it with humility and vulnerability. Allow us to make space for your correction and redemption. Allow us to bow down with humble hearts, hearts of repentance. Bind us together in true unity and restoration. May we hear your voice within the words of these pages. Give us collective eyes to see our role in repairing what has been broken. Allow these words to be a conduit for personal transformation that would lead to collective reproduction. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Nancy.
See you guys.
See you guys next Sunday. Oh, I won't. I have to miss next Sunday, but I'll be back.
We'll miss you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Nancy. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye, Bonnie.
Bye.